let me move this because I think that might be, there you go. So let's just focus on what is this about? Well, Congress appropriated the money to really focus on the COVID-19 pandemic. And when they define the pandemic, they talk about both the public health pandemic, so the public health issues associated with the virus, but broadly, what has happened to the economy. And so you can use this money to help kickstart or rejuvenate your economy. The time periods are really important, that you can go back to March 3rd of this year of 2021, and you can spend the money through December 31st of 2024. There is one exception to that March 3rd deadline, and that is for what's called premium pay. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's extra pay for essential workers. So that you can actually go back to January 27th of 2020. So all the other spending has to be between May 3rd and December 31st of 2024, with that one exception being premium pay. Also, we'll talk about what this 2024 deadline, you have to obligate the money. You can actually have the work performed, particularly on capital improvement infrastructure, through 2026. There's no deadline to sign up for the money, but we are encouraging folks to move ahead and please register in the portal. Some of you may need your boards to approve the county accepting the money, but I wouldn't wait months and months and months. There are some efforts in Congress to repeal some of this money. Not that we think it's going to be successful, but there is kind of some political pressure to have you move forward. There's also a broader allowance of funds for those parts of your community that were disproportionately impacted by COVID, whether it's neighborhoods, groups of people, parts of the community, geographies. There are ways to have broader use of funds for those disproportionately impacted. And that can also be frontline workers, for example. With the recovery funds, when Treasury wires the money to your county, you can put it in an interest-bearing account. And Treasury told us verbally the other day, we're still waiting for it in writing, but you can then use the interest earned from this money for other general government purposes beyond what the interim rule allows. So that's really important, especially if you're getting a good amount of money. Under the CARES Act, the bill that you used last year, that was called the Coronavirus Relief Funds, or CRF dollars, that those of you above 500,000, mainly Marion County, got it directly. And David, if I remember correctly, the state shared some money with the smaller counties. There is a major difference on the county employee payroll support. Under the CRF program, under the CARES Act, they allowed you to use it pretty much for all public safety, public health staff, just blanket, you could cover payroll. Under the American Rescue Plan and what we call the recovery funds, it's more nuanced, where you can still use it for public health, public safety, human service staff, and other frontline public-facing workers. You have to be able to justify the time. You don't have to do it at the timesheet level, but you need to be able to say, this department, this unit, this team was dedicated 100%, 50%, 25% towards COVID, and you can use this funds for payroll support. The next issue is lost revenue, and I'm going to get into these things in more detail, but lost revenue is really important, that if you have had lost revenue, including what we call potential growth, that's really important to calculate, because you can use that amount of money very broadly beyond what is normally eligible under this program. And then for non-federal match, if you are trying to match FEMA, the Economic Development Administration, or EPA's water infrastructure programs, you can't use this money as your local match. And so you need to be aware of that. You can use it to match other state and local investments. So if the state is going to use some of their treasury money and you want to match that, you can do that. But if you're matching federal to federal, you need to be very careful and look at what is the underlying program, whether it's HUD, EDA, FEMA, et cetera. It also allows you to rehire staff. If any of you let go staff during the pandemic, you can actually use this money to rehire county staff back to your staffing levels of January 27th, 2020. All the stuff that I just went through, we're going to go through in more detail, but these are some really key highlights. So again, both on the Treasury website, there's a 150-page interim rule. I tell folks, read page 130 to 150 first. Those are the key definitions, and that's the actual rule. The first 129 pages are really background and Treasury's guidance, but that page 130 to 150 are the true definitions of the rule. Treasury's put out some fact sheets and some FAQs, which kind of walk you through the common questions. And NACo also has a site, we have our own site where we've dug into the rules from a county perspective. So on our website, you can ask any questions, and you can also share your stories of how your county plans to invest the money in your community. And you'll hear us talk about investing, not spending, that we really hope folks can make good use of this money. So let's decode the language of the guidance. Usually in federal law and in federal regulations, they use terms shall and may. You shall do it or you may do it. What's interesting about this guidance is Treasury uses words like encourage or should, which is a little unusual. And when they say encourage, it means you're not required, but they would really like you to do it, but you're not required. And that's particularly true in the broadband section, in the premium pay section, and in a couple others. So as you read it, really think about what are they saying? Are they saying you shall do it, which is traditional federal language, that you may do it, that's at your discretion? And if they use things like encourage, you don't have to do it, it's at your own discretion. So again, the key deadlines to remember that you should be registering your county now. You need one individual at the county to go in and register. And what we're looking at is we're in an interim final rule. So we have until July 16th to issue our comments and to encourage Treasury to make some improvements, but we really think it's a good first start. All counties will have to submit your first interim report by August 31st. That's basically a financial report. And if your county's above 250,000 population, you actually have to also have this other performance plan, which is essentially like your strategic plan or what you plan to do with the money. And then as we move forward, there will be quarterly financial reports that are due. And as I mentioned earlier, you have to obligate the money by December 31st, 2024. So you have time to spend this money, and all the work must be performed by December 31st, 2026. So that really helps, particularly on water and sewer or broadband projects, or maybe courthouse improvements, those kind of things, that they do give you extra time to perform the work. But the contracts must be signed by December 31st, 2024, and the money obligated. Again, so here's the registration site. You go on there, you need a DUNS number and a SAM registration. I think we've covered that, and David and his team have been great partners in helping ensure counties have those. If you are having problems register, please reach out to NACo and we can work with our Treasury contacts to assist you. If you tried to register early on, maybe your county wasn't listed, that should be corrected. So again, if you're having issues, let us know. So let's get into the actual guidance and the key buckets that things are eligible. Number one is public health and broad health, including behavioral health. They're making an assumption that you really can't tell with behavioral health with someone's issues tied to COVID or pre-existing. And so they're really allowing very broad use of the funds for behavioral health. Also, anything really tied to COVID-19 mitigation and response is eligible. So things like vaccines and testing, even data research on variants, very, very broad use on public health. On lost revenue, I'm going to spend more time on it, but the concept here is if your budget was on a certain trajectory and then COVID hit and you lost revenue, you can recoup that lost revenue and spend it moving forward. You can't just simply take the money and put it in your rainy day account. they're saying, say you lost $1 million, you could use $1 million of your allocation, but you need to spend it moving forward. And then there's water and sewer. That does include stormwater. And they basically are saying what is normally eligible under EPA's clean water and drinking water state revolving funds are eligible for this program. So a very broad use of funds on water, sewer, stormwater. And that includes planning, design, implementation. I will note on infrastructure that if you are only using the Treasury money and not other federal dollars, you do not have to follow the NEPA process, the typical federal environmental review process. You can use, and if you are touching like DOT money or EPA or HUD money, then you do need to follow NEPA. But if you are just using local dollars or state dollars with Treasury, then you don't have to. When it comes to addressing the negative economic impacts, there's very broad use to help families, small businesses, impacted industries. You can do cash assistance like the federal government did. There's a real variety of things that you can do. And again, we have real details and examples of what Treasury has specified that's allowed. And you're not limited to those illustrations, but they're clearly eligible. There's this premium pay for essential workers, both at the county and in your community of essential frontline workers who had to deal with the public during this. If you were teleworking, you're not eligible. And they also want you to target premium pay to low to moderate income individuals. And then broadband, I'll spend some more time on because there's a lot of questions around that. So when we talk about lost revenue, particularly in states where you're property tax based and maybe you didn't see the lost revenue, I would still go through the exercise of looking at what is your revenue outlook. And the reason being that they allow you to assume a growth factor in your revenue. And I'm going to show what that means. So one, federal money that flows like CARES Act money does not count as revenue. And so intergovernmental transfers from the federal government doesn't count. But if you do have state aid, that counts as revenue, as long as it didn't come from the federal government originally. The other thing to note about lost revenue is you need to look at it on an entity-wide basis. So the full county government balance sheet, you can't look at just say your criminal justice system, where a lot of counties lost revenue because the court system shut down for a while. And you can't use projections, you have to use real numbers. So why would you go through this exercise? Well, because if you do have lost revenue, you can use it for basically any governmental purpose with just a few exceptions. You can't use it to pay off debt service payments, and you can't use it for rainy day funds. Otherwise, you can use it. You can use it for roads and bridges. You can use it for cyber. You can use it for any other governmental purpose. And we have a lot of members wanting to use it for roads and bridges. So what you do is you basically look at your full fiscal year before the pandemic. So whatever your full fiscal year was prior to January 27th, 2020. So most people, it's fiscal year 2019. You can then average out your previous 3 years of what your average growth was in your budget and your revenues, or you can just assume a default 4.1% national average. So say your budget normally grows, your revenue grows at 2%. But for this purpose, you can use the default 4.1%. So if your revenues were normally growing 2% over the last 3 years, you wouldn't be able to capture lost revenue. But if you take the 4.1%, you can use that difference of 2.1% as lost revenue and use it much broader than what the other rules allow. Probably a lot of questions around this, and I'll come back to it. And again, the other important thing about lost revenue is you have several opportunities to calculate your lost revenue. December 31st, 2021, again in 2022, 23. And so it's not just a one-time calculation. You can review it each year. So maybe your revenues have held up during COVID, but real estate declines in a year or two, you could go ahead and recalculate it. And if you have money left, you might be able to use it much more flexibly. Premium pay is, again, for those of you who want to, it's a may, not a shall. If you want to provide essential workers additional pay, so it basically says that any work performed by an employee of a state, local, or tribal government is eligible. If you were teleworking during COVID, then you wouldn't be, but they're assuming that all county employees are essential. And then the next level of test is, were they actually working from home or the office? The time you were working in the office and public facing in particular, you're eligible up to an additional $13 per hour, capped at $25,000 for any one individual. If you so choose, you could also provide it to other employers within your county if they had frontline workers who you want to reward. And you can actually go back and do back pay to January 27th of 2020 if you so wish, or you can do it just moving forward. On the broader payroll support, so this is different than premium pay. This is for the normal pay for a county employee. If you want to use it for payroll support, just remember that there are differences from the CARES Act, which was the previous allocation of money, versus what's called the American Rescue Plan fiscal recovery funds. You can still charge the employee's time. You can still cover their salary and their related benefits. You just need to be able to say that they were dedicated to mitigating and responding to COVID-19. That could include like jail deputies. If you had sheriff deputies who had to spend time separating inmates or cleaning the facilities, you could say they spent 25% of their time or 50% of their time. There's still a way to charge payroll there. And so that's for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, and other similar employees. It could be Parks and Rec, it could be librarians. You have the ability to say these folks were dealing with COVID. On water and sewer, again, I touched on it earlier. It includes stormwater, which was a question a lot of our members have asked. And you can use EPA's clean water and drinking water list of eligible uses. We have, in our analysis, we have links to those websites. You can see all the different uses of water, sewer, stormwater. You're not following EPA's guidelines, like as far as their rules and regulations. You're just looking to see, would these activities normally be eligible under EPA's program? And if so, you can use Treasury money to make those investments. They're doing it for just administrative ease so that they don't have to answer 10,000 questions about, is this project eligible? They're just saying, if it would normally be eligible under EPA's clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, it's definitely eligible. On broadband, a much trickier language here on broadband, that the goal is to get broadband to households and businesses that don't currently have 25 megabyte download, 3 megabyte upload. The aspirational goal is to get people to 100 megabytes upload and download. That typically means fiber to the home. And so that's aspirational. It does not have to be 100 megabytes. Again, it's an aspirational goal. If it's not practical, or if it's impractical due to geography, topology, or excessive cost, you can do other speeds, but you want to aspire to that 100 megabytes upload and download. Also note that your state will be receiving additional money from US Treasury for broadband type projects. And so if you're doing broadband, I would really be talking to your state about how you could leverage dollars. And then I'm going to wrap up here quick so we can get to Q&A. The bill, the law, said that you can't use this money for pension funds. Treasury has worked with us to define pension funds to mean extraordinary deposits above and beyond what you would normally contribute as part of an employee's regular wage. So you can't go back and use this money to backfill unfunded pension liabilities. But if you are providing payroll support and you normally have a county contribution to a defined benefit plan as part of the retirement, then you can use these funds for routine payroll contributions for your employees' fringe benefits. So you can't go ahead and like double or triple their pension funds. You have to do it what you would do in the routine of their normal payroll. And then I already touched on the restrictions around matching other federal money. You can't use the money. You cannot use it to fund debt service payments, legal settlements, or judgments. You can't use it just to build your rainy day funds. The whole purpose was to stimulate the economy. And then lastly, on the reporting requirements, as I mentioned at the beginning, the first interim reports, basically your financial report, if you've spent any money by the end of July, everybody needs to submit a report by August 31st, 2021. Treasury is working on the report framework right now, and we expect that to come out within the next 2 weeks. And then the cadence will be every quarter, you'll have to submit a report moving forward. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you're above 250,000 population, you'll have this additional, basically a strategic plan called the Recovery Plan Performance Report. And at our annual conference, it's going to be in person and some hybrid virtual options. We're going to have Treasury officials there. We're going to highlight what counties are doing, but we'll also have different federal officials there to talk through what is eligible, some of the questions you have. And so there'll be a big focus at the conference on that issue. So David, why don't I stop there and kind of go through the chat if we have time and see what questions people have had.
Perfect. I don't know if Alana's going to read those, or you want me to read them, or?
Yeah, go ahead, David. And we will send the PowerPoints. And David, I think you probably have our analysis, but we can resend that as well.
Yeah, no, we sent that out. So it was great. Thanks. Here's the first question. Is the $25,000 cap per year or throughout the entire period up to December 2024? I'm assuming that's the sort of hazard pay or extra pay.
It's a single participant total. It's total.
Okay.
And also it says here in the interim rule, there's questions in italics. Those are questions that NACo and other groups sent to Treasury. So as Treasury was developing the guidance, we provided them about 250 questions that our members had been asking. And we spent hours with them, training them about the differences of county government and your revenue sources, your operations, and they really did dig into it. So the questions that you see in italics in the interim rule are really common questions that the governors, the counties, and the cities were asking.
Okay. We've got this question a couple of times on the infrastructure. If a county wants to upgrade its technology to provide more cybersecurity, is that an allowable expense?
Yeah, great question. And I hate to sound like a lawyer on this, but this one is a little bit more complicated. So on the infrastructure, as it relates to IT, I see this as IT focused, right, David?
Yep. Yeah.
There's two portions. First is the lost revenue. If you calculate your lost revenue and you saw that you have lost revenue, up to that amount. So say your county shows that you lost $1 million in revenue. You could then use that $1 million for infrastructure. You could use it for roads and bridges. You could do it to do courthouse improvements, jail improvements. You could use it for any IT infrastructure. Separate from your lost revenue amount, when you look at IT, there's a couple of ways you can use it. One is related to the COVID response and your public health work or your broader community safety, that if you can tie it towards you had to shut down your courthouse and you're serving your communities more remotely, and your clerks or your treasurers or your assessors or maybe your court system had to make upgrades because you're now not doing as much in person, you're serving the public remotely due to COVID, you can use it. And you need to be able to show basically that impact. If you are also doing like contact tracing and you're using it for things related to COVID, it's very user friendly there. If you are supporting your schools, and I don't mean just your school buildings, but if you're helping schools with hotspots and you're helping provide broadband or Wi-Fi in the community, and you're helping with distance learning or remote work, it also could be eligible there. We are working with Treasury to get some more guidance around the infrastructure questions, but in general, if you can tie it to the impacts of the public health pandemic and the national emergency, then it's eligible. If you're just upgrading your entire IT system because it's been 3 or 4 years or 10 years and you just want to buy all new computers, I'd be very careful about doing that. You have to really go back and show how COVID has changed your operations.
Good point. That brings me up to something I want to mention to our people while they're on the phone, Matt, and I think I emailed you. As counties develop their spending plans, I think it would be advisable to write into the spending plan your reasoning and justification for spending this money, even if you have to go down to the page number of the final rule of the Treasury guidance to say, we relied on the language on page 27.
Right.
Felt like this was justifiable, because when these audits happen, you may have a different county auditor, you may have different elected officials who won't be around. So I'm advising our folks to write that into the plan.
Yeah. And David, as we've told Treasury, you've seen one county. You all have these one-off programs that you're serving your local communities. Please tell us, either through David and Indiana counties or directly, tell us your story, tell us what you're trying to do. One example was when we were talking to Treasury officials the other day, we were talking about the impact of COVID on the criminal justice system. And obviously what you had to do in your jails, but also how juries were shut down for months, and in some cases are still shut down. And how many of you are trying to clean up the backlogs in your criminal justice system. And that's not really addressed in the guidance. It's something we're hoping that they'll address in future guidance, but that is clearly a COVID impact, that you would normally have juries on a cadence, on a regular schedule, and those were interrupted. One, it hurts your revenue, but two, now citizens are waiting for due process. And so those of you that are trying to clean up that backlog, many counties want to hire more prosecutors or more public defenders, or provide premium pay to get people to work extra hours. Those are things that we want to make sure are eligible. We don't know every single thing that you want to do, so please tell us these situations so we can educate Treasury.
Yeah. Now, another example I'll give it is one of the counties had a small processing center in the jail, and they couldn't socially distance there. So they are going to renovate the processing center as an effort to combat the spread of COVID going forward. And I told them I think that would qualify, but again, you should justify it in the when they see the receipt for the remodeling, you need to have your plan as to why you did it. So.
Right. And the other thing I will say, in the guidance, public facilities are an eligible use of the funds to retrofit based on COVID mitigation strategies. And there is a clear allowance for air filtration systems. So if you need to update your HVAC systems or your air systems, that is a clear eligible use. And I know a lot of counties, that's probably one of the number one questions that we're getting is about air filtration systems. That is an eligible use. If you're looking to build a brand new building, I would really be careful that it is tied to COVID. What we're asking people to think about is make sure you're charging what's clearly eligible. And if you can free up your local funds to then reallocate local dollars to things that are more questionable, we think that's a smarter strategy. We understand you have a lot of independently elected officials and the boards. In your case, you have 2 levels of boards that need to agree on some of this stuff, but it can be complicated. But if you could free up money for things that are questionable by charging those things that are clearly eligible, that's just a smarter strategy.
quick follow-up point from the question about IT, and just to make sure everybody understands, after the counties calculated their lost revenue, that lost revenue can be spent on any government purpose. So again,
Correct, except for three things. You can't use it for rainy day funds or reserve funds. You can't use it to pay debt service. And, well, maybe there's two things. Rainy day funds and debt service are two that you cannot, but anything else you can.
probably, again, you probably couldn't, I don't know if you can backfill the pension with
You
the,
can't backfill the pension, correct, correct.
so again, as Matt has said, it's really critical to try to do that calculation. And again, you can use the default of 4.1% growth. Anything short of that would be lost revenue, or do the calculation. And again, you know, this was news to us after it came out. We thought it would be fund by fund, but it's total county. So
Right.
like MVA, motor vehicle highway account funding was down last year because people didn't drive as often in March, April, and May. We saw a big decline, but other revenue may have been up, like, I don't know,
Right.
county recorder fees. So you have to balance all that stuff out.
Yeah, and just a comment on that. I got two comments on that. One, they were trying to help us. We did talk to them about like declining gas tax and criminal justice fees and other things. And it became such an administrative burden for them that they just said, hey, we want to make it easier. The other thing I would remember is you can use the 4.1 as a default if you are in a slower revenue growth county. On the flip side, if you are a high growth county where your revenues were really increasing, say you were increasing your revenues 10% a year for the last 3 years prior to the pandemic, and this year you only grew at 8%, you can still capture that 2% difference. So it works both for slower growth revenue counties and for those that were really booming pre-pandemic and maybe the pandemic slowed you down a little bit. You're still growing, but not as much as you were. You can still capture that lost revenue.
Matt, I don't want to keep you, so when you have to go, just let me know. So one question we get is, what if you had a rate increase for an income tax, like we're income tax heavy in Indiana, so a county may have increased their rate in that 3-year period by 0.1%.
Right.
Would they have to back that out in the sort of the normal growth? Because that could skew their numbers.
No, it's a 3-year average. So if you increased your rate and it resulted in increased revenue, that would just be part of your base.
Okay, that's good.
Yep.
Well, I don't have anything else. I don't see anything else in the chat. I know you're a busy man, Matt.
No, so this is the most important thing I can do all day, is help you all figure out how to use these resources. And just know, like, there's also all these other programs. So there's the emergency rental assistance program. There's money at HUD and HHS. So I would be really working with your department heads to see where are the categorical grants flowing in. And so if you're a county that got Treasury money for the emergency rental assistance, maybe you don't use this particular pot of money, the recovery funds, for rental assistance because somewhere else in the county or somewhere else in your community, the city or a nonprofit or somebody else got a bunch of money for rental assistance. So just, I would be working with your other community partners that get other sources of federal money to see what they got so that you're not duplicating efforts. Or if you want to co-invest, you can do that. And then lastly, David, I would just say, cities, towns, townships are getting their own allocation. That was different than CRF, the previous bill, where in some cases counties had to sub-allocate down to the lower level. Just remember that cities, towns, townships are getting their own money. You can co-invest if you so choose. You can also leverage state money. You just need to spend it in your county. So if you're working on regional projects, just be careful that the money benefits your community. And we're going to ask Treasury for a little bit more guidance on that, particularly like in behavioral health, where more and more counties are working regionally. We just want to make sure that Treasury understands how that's kind of flowing, how those programs are delivered nowadays.
Oh, that's good. We did get another question there, Alyssa Miller, about what if the funds were appropriated earlier before March 3rd? And again, if that takes some time to respond to, we can do that later.
Yeah, that's a great question. The difference between like obligated. They're basically saying, well, let me check into that because that's real nuanced. It's a great question. It also does remind me that you received 50% of the money up front, and then you'll receive another 50% in a year from now. Just remember, you can start to accrue expenses. So say you're getting $2 million in total, you got $1 million now, and you want to spend 1.5 million now, you can do that. And then when you get your second tranche of money, you can then apply that money. So you don't have to wait to receive the actual cash transfer next year to actually obligate or spend the money now. Obviously, the county would have to cash flow it, but do know that you can start to obligate money for that second tranche of money that you'll get a year from now. But that question that Calissa answered, I'll need to capture that, Alana, and ask Treasury about that.
Okay, well, thanks. And we did, some counties in Indiana already have received their first installment, so that's great. So we know the system's working, so.
Yeah, again, it's very different than most federal programs where you normally cash flow it and then the federal government reimburses you. In this case, they send you the money up front.
Yeah, so it's been awesome. Well, again, I don't want to keep you, Matt. Thanks for your time and all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be at the annual conference, and I don't know what the attendance will be like, but well,
It's good so far.
Good.
So we're excited to get people back in person.
Yeah. Well, great.
Well, thank you.
Matt.
And hey, any questions, please send them to questions@naco.org. Call us. We work for you. We're trying to help you the best we can. David also knows how to get a hold of me at any point, 7 days a week, 24/7. And we're just trying to help you make smart decisions. And really, you know, it's an opportunity to improve your communities.
Well, thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Appreciate it.